Welcome to episode 44 of the Reading Finnegans Wake in 200 Sessions podcast, where we analyze Finnegans Wake by James Joyce 3 pages at a time. Don't forget to hit the like button, subscribe, and leave a comment to support us. Today, we are plunging into, well, an absolute centerpiece of intellectual warfare within James Joyce's Finnegans Wake.
We really are.
We're focusing specifically on pages 148.33 to 152.03.
And this isn't just a random chunk of text. I mean, it is a full-blown literary and philosophical duel. This passage presents question number 11, which is, at its heart, this piteous, heart-rending plea from the Shem figure.
The exiled suffering artist.
Exactly. And that plea is met with a massive, multi-page and just utterly cold rejection.
Right, and it's delivered by the Shaun figure, who, for this specific segment, has adopted this persona of the highly academic, pedantic, and, let's be honest, pretty arrogant Professor Jones.
Our deep dive is really tasked with sequentially dissecting this incredibly elaborate refusal. And the brilliance of Joyce here, lies in using this seemingly small brotherly conflict to stage a debate about the grandest ideas of the modern era.
Yeah, things like the superiority of time versus space.
The eternal conflict between the sensitive, subjective artist and the pragmatic, objective man of action, and, the very nature of what constitutes truth and knowledge itself.
It's the ultimate intellectual takedown, isn't it? The stakes are nothing less than the exiled poet's soul versus the professor's unwavering commitment to cold, quantifiable spatial logic.
It's dense. It's surprisingly funny in places.
And surprisingly cruel.
Very cruel. So let's unpack this crucial segment for you.
Okay, so the scene opens with this immediate and really evocative introduction of the character asking the question. It begins at line 148.33. The text asks, if you met on the binge, a poor Exiled from Ailing.
And the moment you read that, or even just hear it read aloud, you should recognize the rhythm.
It's got a definite cadence to it.
It does. Joyce sets the question to the meter of one of the most famous poems of Irish sorrow, Thomas Campbell's The Exile of Erin.
Oh, right.
And that poem instantly establishes this mood of profound melancholy. It describes the poor exile sighing for his country, with the dew on his robes heavy and chill. So this framework, it immediately positions the figure not just as a beggar, but as the quintessential, long-suffering Irish exile.
And that phrase, a poor Exiled from Ailing.
Yeah.
There's a lot going on there, isn't there?
Oh, it's a self-portrait steeped in personal pain. Aches I, or I aches, it's a direct and painful reference to Joyce's own chronic, debilitating eye problems.
The ones that tormented him his whole adult life.
Right. They necessitated dozens of surgeries and, forced him to dictate large portions of the wake. So Ailing is both his physical condition, his eyes, and his political status, having chosen to live in exile from Ireland or Erin.
Yeah, I've heard classicists often see a quick connection to Aeschylus in there, too.
Yes, the Greek tragedian. It links the poet's modern physical suffering to this great tradition of classical literary suffering. It's just incredibly efficient writing, equating his literal physical ailment with his role as this legendary, marginalized figure.
So the physical description that follows continues this sort of pathetic yet highly theatrical portrait. He's described as having a tremble, shook, shimmy on shin.
Yeah, and that suggests three things at once. You've got a musical tremolo, you have the popular, maybe slightly rakish 1920s shimmy dance.
And a hint of Jimmy Joyce himself, right?
Yeah.
I remember reading he was known for his gaunt appearance and sometimes had a wispy chin beard.
Exactly, and the layering just keeps going with his voice. His contrary raged in the week of his wailing.
Which is a contradiction. The word contrary suggests a fighter, a pugilist, like a classic Irish ballad hero.
But that's contrasted sharply with Joyce's real-life, famously weak tenor voice. So this is the artist, full of intellectual, contrary fire, but physically diminished. And of course, the pun on the wake of the river or the funeral watch is right there in wailing.
It says he maundered in misliness.
To maunder is to beg or ramble aimlessly, which fits the picture of the wandering artist. But there's more. The Shelta word mislier means walker or tramp, directly connecting the exiled poet to the tradition of these wandering marginalized travelers. He's also played fox and lice, pricking and dropping hips' teeth.
Lice. That immediately brings you back to Stephen Daedalus in Ulysses, doesn't it? He sees himself as a clever fox figure.
It does, and the dreadful dental details, dropping hips' teeth, that's, again, lifted straight from Joyce's life. He had severe dental problems, losing all his teeth after he turned 40. He's depicted as a blind blighter.
Someone suffering from eye problems, literally, who is desperately wringing his handcuffs for peace.
And this desperation, it culminates in a highly corrupted, multilingual prayer at 149.03. He is begging to and Dom Nostrum's fem things to ease.
Okay, let's break that down. That's one of those classic Joycean linguistic tangles.
It is. So he blends the French word for God, Dieu, into Diouf. He mixes this with the constantly recurring Mutt and Jeff or Shem and Shaun motif of being deaf and dumb, which is where you get dumb.
Right, and nostrums, like Nostradamus.
Nostradamus is here, yes. And at the same time, he's invoking the Latin Dominum Nostrum, our Lord.
So it's this confusing, fragmented, multilingual cry from a blind, hungry exile just asking for something to eat.
His request is spiritual, yet it's utterly grounded in physical need. And this inner emotional duality of the poet is immediately apparent in the lines that follow.
He wept while he leapt and guffled with a whimper.
Which perfectly encapsulates the Viconian or Brunonian theme of cyclical duality that underpins the entire book. Being in sadness joyful, in joy sad. The weeping and leaping represent the simultaneous presence of profound sorrow and this desperate manic joy in the artist's life.
He then made cold blood a blue Monday. That's blending Blue Monday, a day for sadness or debauchery, with Maundy Thursday.
Exactly, part of Lent and the Passion of Christ. He takes kiss, cake, or kick with a suck, sigh, or simper. He's depicted as just absorbing everything he can get, whether it's affection or outright abuse.
Which confirms the suggestion that the exile is a divil to learn and a dibble to leech, a devil to learn and teach, but also lustful.
The whole complex, often criticized portrait of Shem the artist is fully laid out for us right there. So then we get to the core request, the spiritual plea itself.
The beggar, described as a fain shinner.
Which could be a willing sinner, a sin finer, or maybe even a beggar who has to shine his shoes.
He pegged or begged the professor to save his immartial wee skill-mustered shoal.
He's begging the spatialist, the pragmatic man of action, to save his immortal soul. But look at how Joyce immediately layers the language. Skill-mustered shoal evokes Joyce as a language schoolmaster.
And simultaneously the Yiddish shul, or synagogue.
Precisely. So it's a spiritual plea from an artistic Jewish-associated exile, the Shem figure, to the pragmatic, historically Christian figure of Shaun, who is now Professor Jones.
And the concluding line is the ice-cold refusal that launches this entire academic takedown we're about to analyze. We don't think Jones we'd care to this evening, would you?
The distance is established. The artist's physical, spiritual, and financial distress is just dismissed with a casual academic wave of the hand.
Professor Jones does not mince words, does he? He starts with this aggressive, emphatic rejection. No blank ye.
Yeah, that blank is Joyce's way of censoring an expletive. It makes the refusal even more hostile. It's a sharp no, damn you.
And instantly, Jones shifts the ground. He moves the conversation away from the beggar's need and onto his own defense against what he sees as intellectual and political attacks.
Exactly. He assumes the question is an accusation. So you think I have impulsivism. Did they tell you I am one of the 46?
So he's defending himself against the charge of being an impulsive Bolshevik, a revolutionary.
Right, and the 46 refers both to the Bolsheviks and, historically, to the 46th British Regiment that was stationed in Ireland. So he's associating himself with the oppressive military presence. He's positioning himself as a staunch defender of order.
And then he connects back to the father figure, HECE, by mentioning a wag on my ears, wax or earwig, and states that the exiled poet's life is not natural.
So this refusal, it isn't just a rejection of the artist's request, it's a total systemic rejection of the Shem figure's entire subjective, wandering, time-obsessed existence.
But the core of his academic argument rests on logic, or at least his version of it.
Yes. Jones insists on logically confuting the premise because the beggar has committed the fallacy of begging the question, assuming the conclusion that his soul is savable or that Jones must save it is already proven. Jones just refuses to grant that basic premise.
And this is where we get the first instruction for us, the listener, presented with that classic Jonesian arrogance.
He suggests you should consult his earlier work on the same dime cash problem elsewhere. And this is the foundational philosophical link he's making. Time is money.
The dime cash problem links time and currency, suggesting the artist's subjective focus on time is actually just a cheap, materialistic distraction.
And crucially, Jones insists on arguing from the blink point, which is from the German Blickpunkt, or point of view of an eminent spatialist. This is the key.
So let's unpack that. Shem is associated with fluid time, introspection, the river.
And Shaun, or Jones, is the spatialist. He is concerned with concrete, quantifiable space, the structure of the city, the stable, physical, masculine world of HCE. He rejects the subjective medium of time in favor of objective, measurable space.
So as a committed spatialist, he has to launch a comprehensive attack on the prevailing philosophy of time.
Which naturally leads him to critique Henri Bergson. He dismissively calls it the sophology of Bittchen, the sophistry of Bergson.
And Bergson was a huge deal at the time, right?
Mm-hmm.
The great French philosopher associated with the concept of duration or subjective nonlinear time.
He was the intellectual battleground of the 1920s. This was all satirized brilliantly by Wyndham Lewis in his book Time and Western Man. Lewis specifically targeted Joyce, Proust, and Bergson for what he saw as their dangerous, effeminate obsession with flowing subjective time, which he believed undermined objective reality. Jones is basically just parroting this very influential contemporary critique.
He claims Bergson is driven by a purely dime-dime urge, but exhibits cash-cash characteristic.
It's a linguistic blend. He's suggesting the philosophy of time is tainted by money and materialism. You have the demiurge, a divine creator, mixed with hide-and-seek, cash-cash in French, implying that the whole philosophy is sneaky and materialistic.
And he argues these characteristics are merely borrowed from the fiery good mother misfortune.
Which is such a layered jab. It links Bergson to the Shem Stephen Dedalus figure, who famously declared he left home to seek misfortune. It also alludes to Proust's masterpiece, In Search of Lost Time. Jones is lumping all the modernist, time-obsessed literary figures, Joyce, Proust, Bergson, under one blanket condemnation.
Arguing their focus on time is just born from a perverse desire for suffering and monetary gain.
The dismissal of modernism continues. Jones calls the temporal philosophy brisk as your DBC.
The Dublin Bread Company, which, according to a recurring character in Ulysses, was known for damn bad cakes. It's an insult to the quality and substance of these time theories.
And this poor quality philosophical cake is coated in homoid icing, homemade, or maybe even a hint of homosexuality or homicide, continuing the negative, often effeminate associations that were leveled against the introspective artist figure.
Jones then asserts that this entire body of work is simply a ridiculization of the woo and wears hairs theorics of Weinstein.
Einstein, of course. The other major figure associated with time philosophy in the public imagination, though often misunderstood. And woo-woo and wears hairs references a kid's game in the Who's Who reference book, suggesting Einstein's theories are childish and only relevant to a self-important social elite.
So after all that heavy academic cannon fire, Jones tries to simplify his argument.
He puts it clumsily, or maybe plumply, with blunt force, that the beggar's speech form is a mere surrogate, or perhaps a sorrowgate, an outlet for pain. It lacks true reality.
And the core philosophical duality he wants to establish is between quality and tality.
Derived from the Latin phrase qualis est, talis est is. Jones is arguing that the qualities and characteristics the beggar exhibits are just secondary to his physical spatial reality.
Then here comes the high pedantry. He says these ideas are alternativo-mentally harrogate and arrogate, alternately provincial and arrogant.
And this is a subtle, magnificent piece of self-satire by Joyce. Jones is mocking the use of the French term alternative movement. The joke is that Joyce himself once criticized Flaubert for misusing this word, applying it to 3 items instead of its proper use for only 2. Jones applies it here, mock pedantically, to just 2 items, quality and tality.
So he's confirming that his entire argument is just a performance of inflated, self-serving intellectualism.
Absolutely. The artist's plea to Jones is either unsophisticated or presumptuous, but it's never true.
So we move now into Jones's pedantic lecture on the proper use of Latin, focusing on the misuse of the word talus.
Right. Talus, meaning such in Latin, is abused by many passimes, so many persons, or cited frequently passim throughout texts. Jones is elevating a minor academic grievance into a major philosophical defect.
He announces, pretty dramatically, that he is currently working out a quantum theory on the matter, because the situation is tantalizing.
And he's linking it to the Latin tantum, quantum, so much as he's trying to blend classical philology with cutting-edge physics. This blending of scientific and philosophical terms, often in a pseudo-intellectual way, is the hallmark of the Jones-Shaun figure.
But there's a heavier subtext here too, isn't there? With talus.
There is. Talus can also be read as the Hebrew word for a prayer shawl, talus. By critiquing the misuse of talus, Jones is subtly reinforcing his critique of Shem, the Jewish associated artist figure. He is weaponizing linguistic pedantry against a racialized target.
He then offers these mundane examples of pessims, persons or pessimists, misusing the word. For instance, asking if you've been seeing talus and talus, such and such, when you just mean, will you put up at 3 of Irish?
Which is just, will you buy 3 pence worth of Irish whiskey? An everyday question elevated to absurd, formal academic language.
But as soon as Jones tries to be illustrative, his examples immediately degenerate into crude sexual innuendo.
Which is typical of the repressed yet prurient Shaun figure. He asks about a lady eater, a seducer, asking, is Talus to Talus the sword swallower? The same Talus von Talus, the pen scrusher.
The sword swallower, performing at the Criterion Theater, often carries the innuendo of fellatio, while pen scrusher links back explicitly to Shem the penman.
In a context of sexual humiliation, playing on the proverb, the pen is mightier than the sword, but twisting it into a vulgar, degrading context.
And what's really revealing about Professor Jones's character is the immediate disclaimer that follows.
Yes, he says, or this is a perhaps cleaner example. He recognizes the filth he just introduced and understands exactly what he's implying before pivoting to a supposedly higher intellectual ground.
So he moves to his cleaner example, which is drawn from a post-Vortex peace investigation, a postmortem police investigation, or a philosophical cudgeling of a determinist philosopher, chronic Spinosis.
Spinoza, the great rationalist and determinist. He lived in The Hague, which is referenced here as the egg fever and chills. The lecturer, a scholarship student at Trinity College, Dublin, who had to do menial tasks, asks the central philosophical question of identity. Why is which suchman's talus qualis?
Why is one such and such like another? Why does the quality match the thing?
Exactly. And the answer comes from a Dr. Gedanke, right, from Stuttgart or Stuttgart, who was predictably wiping his whistle, having a drink, stereotyping German academics as heavy drinkers. He tersely retorted, while thou beest one zoom of a war.
And that retort is a classic Joycean synthesis.
It's German, weil du bist ein Sohn der Welt. Because you are a son of the world mixed with the gross insult, son of a whore.
But it also carries the deep Viconian implication of the cyclical whirl.
Right. The ultimate philosophical explanation for why things are the way they are is simply because you are part of the inescapable, messy cycle of existence. In the end, Jones confirms the absurdity of his own pedantry by concluding that talus and qualis originally mean the same thing.
Suggesting his entire lecture was a rhetorical exercise designed only to prove his dominance over the exiled artist, not to seek any real truth.
Now we enter the final and most complex phase of Jones's defense. His theoretical apologetics for the supremacy of space over time. He brings in another intellectual heavyweight to bolster his argument. Professor Lévy-Bruhl.
That's Lucien Lévy-Bruhl, the Jewish-French anthropologist. His work on the primitive mind was highly influential and controversial in the early 20th century.
And Jones claims Lévy-Bruhl, despite his flawed methodologies, supports the spatialist position. But then Jones immediately critiques Lévy-Bruhl's account of the Assyrian kings Sennacherib and Shalmaneser,
both associated with exiling or killing Jews.
And the Mr. Steckles and Dr. Hyde's problem. Jones asserts Lévy-Bruhl's account differs to Deculo by the whole heaven from his own findings.
The insertion of skekels, or shekels, for money here reinforces that persistent anti-Semitic undertone of Jones's critique, doesn't it? It frames the discussion of the primitive mind in terms of commerce and race.
It does. Jones is implicitly arguing that the mentality of the exiled artist, Shem, is both primitive and avaricious. And then Jones does this curious thing where he performs a kind of self-martyrdom,
trying to link his own position to that of an ostracized intellectual.
Yes. He says, the reason I went to Jericho must remain for certain reasons a political secret, and that he will soon be wanted in Coventry, a pun on being sent to Coventry to be ostracized. He's trying to portray himself as a truth-teller persecuted for his spatialist views.
And his ultimate critique of Lévy-Bruhl is that his work is vitiated by the diamond cash diamond fallacy, linking time and money again.
A term Jones claims to have coined, likely referencing the philosopher J.F. Dunn's great time fallacy. Jones's entire position rests on the belief that temporal philosophy is fundamentally corrupt because it confuses time with currency.
This leads to Jones citing Lévy-Bruhl's talked-off confession, which allegedly caused a leonine uproar.
And the confession asks, why am I not born like a Gentileman, and why am I now so speakable about my own eatables?
Which is a spectacular satire of self-important modern intellectual posturing. It echoes the titles of Nietzsche's Ecce Homo, Why I Am So Wise, and plays off Oscar Wilde's famous line about the English country gentleman.
And the Jew-Gentile motif is explicit here. The exiled artist, Shem, the object of Jones's critique, is being associated with this self-obsessed, non-Gentile genius.
The publication details Joyce provides are also rich with contemporary context. Feigenbaumblatt and Father, Budapest, 5688 AM.
Right. Feigenbaumblatt means fig tree leaf in German, a common Jewish surname. It's published in Budapest, and the Hebrew calendar year, 5688, corresponds precisely to 1927-1928.
Which is exactly when Wyndham Lewis published his vicious, highly relevant critique of Joyce and Bergson.
Exactly. Jones then notes Lévy-Bruhl takes off his gabardine and wig, the gabardine being the long, loose gown traditionally associated with Jews. This just cements the racialized subtext.
So Jones uses this confession to pivot away from Lévy-Bruhl's flawed anthropology and toward his own core thesis, the supremacy of space.
Which he observes via cutting-edge technology, the ferroscope of television. And this transition is just highly visionary. Lévy-Bruhl observed that by all's well that ends well, the cyclical life of man is temporarily wrapped in obscenity. Time is messy, obscene, and cyclical. But Jones finds the solution in technology and space.
By using the ferroscope of television, Jones claims he can easily believe heartily in my own most spacious immensity as my own house and microbimos cosm.
He's saying that through technology, through far-seeingness, he can observe the vastness of the cosmos and prove that the immediate, quantifiable space of his own house is just as significant.
It's a moment of genius from Joyce. Connecting his own farsightedness to the emerging technology of television and radio.
Which relied on vacuum tubes and was primarily broadcast at night, fitting the nocturnal setting of the wake. Jones even acknowledges the technical difficulties, noting it needs still some subtractional betterment in the readjustment of the more refrangible angles.
He's basically saying, even with technical limitations, the spatial view is superior.
And that superior spatial proof is delivered in this spectacular piece of mock mathematics where Jones tries to reconcile complex geometry with human existence.
The cue of my volumes is to the surfaces of their subjects as the sphericity of these globes is to the veracity of Farinelli's vacuum.
That ratio is absolutely saturated with meaning. It invokes the ancient problem of squaring the circle relating the cube to the sphere. The sphericity of these globes is a double reference, geographical and celestial spheres.
And crudely testicles.
Yes. Jones is using the language of science to launch a deeply cultural and personal attack on the exiled artist.
And he immediately uses this pseudo-scientific calculation to argue for a parliamentary motion against the morbidization of the modern man-about-woman type.
Which reflects the deep contemporary anxiety about declining birth rates, and the perceived effete nature of modern manhood anxiety is often leveled against artistic types like Shem.
The final term, Farinelli's vacuum, seals the critique.
It references the famous 18th century castrato singer Farinelli, who was literally defined by a reproductive vacuum. This vacuum is contrasted with veracity or fruitfulness, masculine reproductive capability, and the term also cleverly links back to the vacuum tubes necessary for the radio and television technology Jones relies on.
So the spatial man, Jones, is defending masculine, reproductive, tangible space against the effeminate, useless temporal art of Shem. This brings us to Jones's final, most brutal attack on the Romantic artist.
He explicitly justifies downtrodden on my foes, correcting the Neo-Italian or Paleo-Parisian Scala of tinkers and spanglers.
And that phrase lumps together the major intellectual opponents of Lewis and Jones. Proust, who was Parisian and time-obsessed.
Spengler, who wrote about cyclical time, and even Lewis himself, the ironic presence of the name. Jones says they oppose him due to revulsion from Romanitis, revulsion from Romanticism. Jones sees the exiled artist as just a failed, overly emotional romantic.
He dismisses the time-obsessed romantic exile, Shem, as only pining after a deadbeat escapement.
Which is a feature of pendulum clocks linked to the Renaissance watchmaker Tom Tompion. He calls the entire artistic quest a common unguardient waste of time. The artist in rags is obsessed with obsolete mechanisms and useless pursuits.
And we get this perfect, painful image of the failed artist's present reality juxtaposed with his historical obsessions. His ever-present toes are always in release out through his overpassed boots.
It's such a layered insult. Visually, the artist's current failure is symbolized by his toes sticking out of his overpassed boots. His obsessive focus on the past leads to his present destitution.
And linguistically, Rejection is a direct reference to T.S. Eliot's The Wasteland, and the Welsh Book of Taliesin, confirming that the modernist or romantic focus on historical texts leads to a literal breakdown of material reality.
Jones then mocks the artist's language. Take heed to that Loose-Wallah or how he bolo the bat. Take heed to that thief, rascal Loose-Wallah, and his ridiculous language, bolo the bat.
The scene then sort of devolves into a brief drunken digression, bringing in Malachi Mullicky, and the neat drop that would malt in my mouth.
And Jones refuses to engage with the obvious fallacy as to the specific gravitates of the two deglutables, the difference in specific gravity between whiskey and cough drops, perhaps dismissing it as a matter for specialized mocking disciplines like students of mixed hydrostatics and pneumodipsics, the study of drinking and drunk sailors.
So even Jones's vices must be quantified and labeled with academic jargon.
And in a final bizarre flourish, Jones links himself to Welsh figures, Myrddin or Merlin, Giraldus Cambrensis, Llewellys Aot Brillers. It's as if he's symbolically adopting a stable, ancient Celtic identity, a geographical, spatial identity, to critique the unstable, wandering Irish poet.
Which brings us to the conclusion, the final triumphant declaration of the Spatialist. Shem's entire plea is deemed all posh and rubbish, stuff and rubbish.
And Jones asserts the crucial distinction. His man's when is no other man's quander. Time is purely subjective, personal, and therefore useless as an objective measure of reality.
The triumphant conclusion is the core thesis. The all is where in love as war.
Everything from passion and unity, which is love, to conflict and division, war, is dictated by location in space, not by subjective flowing time. Jones's domain, the stable, safe space, is the plane where miat soar you'd easy rouse the thunder from.
And he finishes with this stable, traditional, religious, spatial metaphor of refuge and faith, where innocent looks best. Pick. There's holly in his eyes. He connects himself to traditional, concrete Catholic imagery, Pope Innocent, the holly in the ivy carol, contrasting the chaotic, temporal, wandering world of the artist with his own grounded, certain spatial realm.
The artist must be dismissed because his reality is based on feeling, on when, not on facts, on where.
So this passage, pages 148.33 to 152.03, is just a masterclass in how Joyce elevates a simple request for aid into a sprawling philosophical battleground.
We've seen the exiled artist, Shem, pleading for compassion associated with time, Bergson suffering, and the subjective past.
And we've seen the Professor Jones persona, Shaun, reject that plea entirely, using a barrage of pseudo-intellectual arguments rooted in spatialism, rigid logic, and quantifiable concrete reality.
The essence of this deep dive really reveals the conflict between the time-bound artist seeking soul and pity, and the space-oriented critic demanding proof and immediate dismissal of the romantic in rags.
The linguistic density is just unparalleled. I mean, weaving together history, personal biography, Joyce's eyes, and teeth-cutting-edge physics, Renaissance watchmaking, 18th century castrati, and contemporary literary feuds.
All to construct a single, overwhelming argument.
And what should really stand out to you is the fundamental cruelty involved in this academic rejection. Jones uses his supposed intellectual superiority, his mastery of where and what, to justify refusing to acknowledge the subjective suffering of his brother, the person defined by when and how.
And this leaves us with the central question Jones raised, and the one he used to justify his cold refusal. Giving Professor Jones's highly intellectualized assertion that the focus should always be on where, on space, rather than when, on time. Consider this. If we only define reality through stable location and quantifiable fact, what do we lose by rendering subjective, time-bound human experience irrelevant?